Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today over here at the Range Report, and we're here with Dennis Woods, who's the author of the Black Flag Journals. This is One Soldier's Experience in America's Longest War. Dennis, thank you very much for coming with us today on a little journey of exploration through your book. I haven't read the whole thing full all the way through because everybody knows I'm in the transition of moving, but what I have read so far, I got to tell you, it's probably the best look inside the mind and experience of somebody who's been in combat. So I want to thank you for joining us and tell us a little bit about your book, why you wrote it, you know, how this came to be.
Hi, Frank. Well, thank you for inviting me, and for the Liberty First Foundation, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Dennis Woods, Command Sergeant Major, retired, U.S. Army. I was in for about 34 years. I served for every president from Reagan to Obama. I managed to go to war and kill every president from Reagan to Obama. So for a gun show, this is a pretty good tie-in. You know, with guns, this is what you do with guns. I wrote Black Flag Journals for my daughter. It's originally based on 9 battle book journals that I kept. You know, all of my earlier wars were short. So on the day the towers fell, I didn't think the war was going to last that long. I was thinking maybe, what, 2 years tops. So, you know, you can't ask me how long a war is going to be because I don't know. Anyway, as the war was going on, I'm keeping a journal because I'm thinking that by the time I retire and this war is over, my daughter will be growing up in school. And then when she's over, when this is done, she can read the journals and she'll be an adult. Little did I know that the war would go from the time the towers fell, she's in elementary school, to I'm dropping her off at college. And I'm still going back to war in the same locations. So when she finished her undergrad in the new school in New York City, she read the journals, my wife read the journals, and they thought I'd make a good book. And so did the publisher. So that's how the journals became a book. The title, Black Flag Journals, though, is based on who we fought. Turns out in Islam, black is the color for jihad. And that's why all these flags for the people we opposed have a black theme on them. It's also why in many of these beheading videos, there's a black flag in the background, because in Islam, black's the color for jihad. These people that are committing this act is a religious experience for them, not so much for us. So that's the reason I give it the title, Black Flag Journals.
Well, went through some of this, and I got to say that some of the experiences that you write in this thing, I can't imagine being a civilian and trying to put myself in the footprints of somebody who's over there fighting for us. You know, some of the situations that you guys find in what you think is just an innocent situation could be anything but, and what something that looks dangerous isn't. And, you know, I can't imagine having to have your head on a swivel 24 hours a day, be constantly on point, you know, to be able to address every single threat as it's coming, and then to develop the tactics that you need to, and the equipment, the armament in order to defeat those tactics while still having to, you know, to abide by certain rules of engagement. It's what you guys deal with is just incredible, the amount of resolve and dedication that you have to have. But I also imagine it's pretty frustrating. You know,
there are times when it's great, and there's times when you're just split up. Yeah, I record in the book my things like my closest kill, my longest gunfight, but I also include events that aren't normal to a war journal. I include what it's like to kill at close range as opposed to killing at distance. I include stories of how we conducted conflict resolution, things you wouldn't expect us to be involved in. We were having to use at some points conflict habituated marriage counseling techniques with Afghans as a way of just breaking down the internal dysfunction they have in their units. You know, they're so wildly dysfunctional internally that externally they can't go out and be a police force or law enforcement. So we would counsel, coach, mentor, teach these people, and then you solve these internal conflicts, and they can go out and run a law center, be an army, be a policeman. So those are stories you don't normally hear. And, you know, it just covers 57 months of combat. is my time from the fall of the Twin Towers to my last tour.
Yeah.
But yeah, 57 months in combat. When you think about many Vietnam vets, it's 1 12-month tour. So the wave of issues coming off of this war hasn't even started yet.
Yeah. Well, we've seen a lot of.
Because we got soldiers that have spent multiple years in combat.
We've seen a lot of instances of people that we know that PTSD is a tremendous thing that in previous wars was never addressed properly.
Yeah,
Which they would just call shell shock. And now these guys are coming home, and there are some pretty severe ramifications. And unfortunately, we're losing more soldiers to their own hand than we were to the enemy.
Yes.
And it's not them pulling the trigger. It's the person that they turned into. It's the malady that affected them that pulls the trigger. And it's a horror to know that so many of these guys and girls are surviving the atrocities of war, only to come home and not be able to have a support system that's close enough to them. And we were speaking earlier about not having somebody that you could communicate with effectively who's close to you. And we said that your book is serving as like a translation tool between the civilian and the soldier, so that a civilian who reads the book would be able to better understand some of the terms, some of the vernacular that the soldiers use, so that if a soldier or airman, Marine, wants to start talking about their experience, they're not looking at somebody with that glazed over look.
Exactly. One of the things I did with Black Flag Journals was I wrote about many of our common events to help bridge that gap in communication. And I used a form of stealth education when I did this. For many of us, when we tell a story, whether it is a fishing story or what happened at work the other day, we all speak as if the other person has common knowledge of that event. Well, combat is this milestone in a person's life. It's that thing that they feel they have to talk about sometimes, and there's others that don't. But for those that do want to speak, when they're telling you these stories, and you don't have any of this common knowledge because you didn't go through training, you didn't deploy to war, they often have to stop in the middle of telling a story and explain something. Well, that doesn't happen too many times before frustration is built into that conversation. Eventually, they quit speaking to the people around them and start talking to the soldiers that they served with who are now 3-4 states away. What they've done is they've locally isolated themselves. I can't talk to you, the friend that I see every day, about these major events in my life because it just becomes too frustrating. So they've locally isolated themselves. So a way to get around some of that is when I write about these basic events that happen to all of us. Example would be a rocket attack or a mortar attack. I write about what the killing mechanism is for that event, how it functions, and because it functions in a certain manner, what you do to avoid being killed, and then what your actions are after the fact. So by including these things in a stealth education or in a story, the reader can read the event, receive a certain amount of common knowledge, but not know that they're being lectured to. It's not a class. It's just it's a hidden class. It's education through storytelling. And I do this for roadside bombs, the IED. I do it for gunfights. I do it for indirect fire. So it gives you common knowledge. So when you have this interaction with them, you're going to have a little bit level of understanding. And that's one of the uses of Black Flag Journals as a communication aid.
Well, it is important. I mean, I've spoken to a lot of vets that I've worked with in the past that have tried to explain this situation to me. I have a tremendous background of firearms and training and stuff like that, but a lot of the tactics that I would use to defend myself on American soil are not exactly the same thing you guys are using to defend yourselves.
Yeah. I'd probably get locked up for some of the things to do overseas.
So when they talk about some of this, I'm always curious. So I try to pay extra special attention because I'm always looking to educate myself on what is done. And you guys just lose me a lot of times, and I feel like, yeah, not
Yeah,
only,
that's that common knowledge. We all speak as if the other guy has a basic understanding.
yeah, and like I said, I'm sitting reading through the book, and if I would have mentioned somebody about the jihadi motorcycle gangs,
Yeah,
I know what I would be talking about. If somebody mentioned it to me now, I know what it is because it's in the book. This is something I read about. So I would have a little bit of a basis of understanding where otherwise, before I read this, I had no idea that was something that was happening.
that was the thing. Yeah.
I didn't no idea. I had no idea about the covered trenches that you've so nicely photographed through here. I mean, tactics that the enemy was employing against you that you said, my God, how is it possible? Do people say, how is that war going on for so long? The tactics that
Oh yeah, there's a lot of subjects to get into there.
And just what they were doing with the civilian.
In the book, first the book is clear. The Army's. We have a little bit of connection problem.
That's right.
And the book is clear. The government has already given me authority to write. So, and I served in areas that were well covered by the international press. So you won't find secrets in there, but you will find what we were actually doing. This is a first-person eyewitness account. Some of the things that we encountered, some of it goes back to classic warfare. Combat is a team sport. It's my team against your team. So if you see it from that angle, a lot of this that you'll experience in the book, you can probably see yourself in it if you've ever played on a team. You'll be able to visualize what's fighting a city. You'll be able to visualize how you would improve your position after you get attacked. I'm really proud of the people that I served with. A lot of the soldiers, they were great. This takes me down so many different roads. But, in any of the pictures that you bring up, I'd be able to speak to them and then drag us through the conversation.
Well, yeah, I'll put in the video. You'll be able to see some of the photographs that was in here, but just some of the photographs of the munitions you guys captured.
Oh yeah,
and just 40-foot containers full of explosives, full of fully automatic weapons, full of RPGs and all kinds of, my God, just incredible stuff. You say, how did you guys possibly combat this kind of stuff when you have rules of engagement that the enemy doesn't have? You guys are allowed to.
Yes, I do speak to that in the book, and I bring it up a couple of times. And the rules of engagement, I mentioned it a couple of times in the book because I'm telling you how it changed, what it was, and what it became. And I give little explanations as to how it morphed. And the rules of engagement, they're what allow you to kill with a conscience. Now you mentioned, we have rules. They don't. One example is, we have respect for human life. The other guy will use civilians as a meat shield to avoid our. So there's a picture in there you'll see. One of them is a story of a technique that I'm responsible for developing. And it was the first use of training munitions on a cannon to reduce civilian death. In the picture in there, you'll see two soldiers standing next to a 155 millimeter cannon. And they have two different bullets. One's blue, one's green. Where you can take pride as an American is that we were using a training munition that doesn't detonate. It just puts out smoke, but is a ballistic match for a live high explosive round. And we were using this to avoid civilian death. The way it operates is often when you adjust fire against the target, you're trying to walk your explosive round into this massive enemy. In the process of moving that round around after each detonation, you have the potential for civilian death and collateral damage. Well, by using a ballistically matched training bullet, I'm making these adjusting rounds that don't blow up. So I've reduced potential for civilian death. So I'm still killing the same people in the same weapon. The only thing I changed was what munition I load. But by changing the munitions that I load, the effect on the other end is that we as a nation are doing these things to avoid civilian death, and they are not.
And you're reducing the collateral footprint, but
it also allows us to play within the rules. You know, we have these rules of what we can and can't do, and if we get outside of our own rules, we are prosecuting ourselves. Something you can remind me on is talk about the Manchester document later on. So the use of this training munition allows me to fire closer to these protected structures and these protected areas, because I'm not limited by the blast effect of the bullet, more so as range and probable error for something that I'm shooting at. So it makes a difference. So instead of me having to stay this far away from something that is protected, I can get this close to something because I'm shooting another bullet. And you know, the blue bullet that you see in the book, yeah, that thing is 98 pounds. So 98 pounds coming from 10,000 feet. You know, people didn't notice that when
yeah, it's going to carry a little bit of inertia with it.
yeah, get a little bit, you know, and there's secondaries come off of it. So it's still dangerous, but it's less lethal. So that is one thing that we are doing.
Now you were telling me earlier about a aiming and targeting system that you had developed.
Oh, yes. I don't want to sound like that guy Norm from Cheers who has an answer for everything, but I am an inventor, and I developed for the Army a device called the Gelin, Gun Electronic Laser Optics Night Sight. What it is a mounting bracket that allows...
Yeah, say it one more time, because we had a hiccup in the video. I want to get...
I'm the inventor of a device called the Gelin, the Gun Electronic Laser Optics Night Sight. What this does is allows us to use thermal optics and laser aimers on large bore weapons. It allows them to see at night. And by doing that, by putting a thermal optic on a 105 millimeter gun, which fires a 33-pound bullet, I can train from defending myself at the far tree line with a machine gun to defending myself at the far ridge line with a cannon. It allows it to see at night. One of the deficits that we had as an Army was we had put all of our development, all this capital development, into tanks and Bradleys, fighting vehicles, into rifles and machine guns. We hadn't done anything to develop night vision for large bore weapons, like a 105 millimeter gun, 155 millimeter gun, which shoots a 98-pound bomb. So I bridged that gap with a thing called the Gelin.
That's got to make you feel good knowing that even after even after you've left the field of battle, you've hung up your uniform, you're in the private sector, but you still have something of yours that
they're still out there capping.
The next guys are out there using to defend the nation, defend themselves. That's a tremendous feather in a cap. It really is.
It is. I talk about some of that in the book as well. It's I had the ability to design, develop, build, test, and then go use in combat something that helps our own people.
Now, would this have been something that you would have been able to do outside of the realm of the military, or do you think that's something that you would have come up with, or is it that you saw a need and you figured out how to fill it?
It's find a need, fill it. I did what anybody else could do. I just managed to pull it off.
So this was so it's good to know that at least in our services that the innovation is encouraged and rewarded.
Yes, the Army operates like a Fortune 500. In fact, it often bills itself as such. We have programs within the organization where they encourage the youngest member that might have an idea. There's an avenue in which they can get that information into this Army's stream of development at large. And I'm an example of that. I'm one individual serving in the 82nd Airborne Division. I had this device that works, fills a need, and because I could go through this program that we operate, I was able to affect the entire organization. It's a pretty good deal. The gap that it filled is prior to the development of the Gelin, In order to use a large bore weapon in a direct fire engagement at night, you had to fire an illumination round into the sky. And when that illumination round drops, it's a big magnesium flare coming down under a parachute, and it has a cone of light. Well, it's coming down, and it produces this cone of light on the ground. It is wafting under that parachute. So your cone of light is moving over that target. If I'm looking at it, and you can imagine this yourself, if you're watching a target at great distance through an optic, and the light source is moving back and forth over it, you would have an obstructed view.
Right.
View on the target. You may not even find it in that cone of light. So, and there's also the fact that once you fired an illumination round, they kind of know you're looking at them. Somebody saw us because there's now illumination round in the sky. So they start moving. So by putting a thermal optic and a laser aimer on a cannon, my first round is not a light bulb in the sky. My first round develops speed on the ground because I'm shooting them not with a rifle, but with a 105 millimeter rifle. And then this 33-pound bomb, when it detonates, it kicks off 15,000 fragments in a pattern. You can be all the man you want. You're not going to outrun it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the moniker is, for
too fast, the bomb's too big.
For a moniker for the U.S. services that we own the night, and you put one more page on that deed. That's one more facet of the night that we own, and thank you for that. I mean, it's great to see somebody innovate, and it's nice to see something that comes from within. It's nice to see that it wasn't wasn't thought up with some independent outside defense contractor to come in and did it, but this was somebody from the organization that said
another GI.
Yeah, this is something.
We have a lot of things like that. We run these programs, ideas, and push them out. Now, yes, we receive a lot of stuff from the outside, all these contractors and defense contractors. And some of the things that we come up with that we can't develop gets pushed to them.
Right.
So industry is informed of our needs instead of industry devising something and trying to sell it to us.
Right.
So that helps you as a taxpayer as well, as you're buying the things you actually need, not what somebody sold somebody on.
Right. Well, I mean, Lord knows that the military over our illustrious history has spent a lot of time and resources and intellectual capital on things that did not work properly. And, you mentioned the Bradley. If you know the history of the Bradley, there was several incarnations of that vehicle before it came to where it is today. And there was a lot that was done wrong with that program.
Oh yeah. It's a great machine now. I like that we have it. But one of the things I mentioned in the book was that, our own development of stuff. The enemy has a vote as to what happens. This is the longest war in U.S. history. It's that long because the enemy chose to keep resisting. Because we've won our initial wars already. That's already happened for us. It's just this war won't be like, World War II. There's not going to be a signing on the bow of a battleship.
Right.
But some of the innovation I cover in there simply is in the gun trucks. We went in, we were an army designed for maneuver, to get around and outmaneuver our enemy. And we did so. And we crushed like the fourth largest army in the world, the Iraqi army. And we pushed the Taliban out of their own country. But the side effect of that was that you had light equipment. Once you occupy a battle space and you start running around the same areas, they now have the option of putting bombs in the road and trying to take you out with that way. I can't beat you in a fight, so I place a trap for you. Kind of like that analogy of, the guy snuck into your house and steals your stuff, as opposed to trying to face to face and rob you. They can't beat us in a gunfight. They can't beat us in a high-end firefight, but they can set a trap for you. So we go in, we win this initial engagement, We wind up staying. And as we're running around, now they're putting these bombs out. So what you'll see in the book, one of the first modifications we made, and this was done by soldiers on the ground, was to add armor plating to our light trucks. I refer to it in the pictures there as hillbilly armor. And it really was. It's a boilerplate welded to a truck, and it's our mechanics are coming up with this stuff. Some of the guys who just happened to be motorhead who were in the Army, figured out how to hook up car batteries to make a welder.
Yeah.
They're arcing the stuff together. So you'll see a picture of that in there. And then you'll also see a picture of a factory-produced, high-end, high-functioning, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle, called an MRAP. So in this war, we've gone from light vehicles that can be taken out with a small bomb that we modified with hillbilly armor to these great vehicles that can take a hit from a big bomb and everybody still walk away from it. The analogy I use in the book is that arms progression in this war simulated arms progression in medieval times. You make a sword, okay, I'll make a shield. Now I've got a shield, you make a suit of armor, and it escalates. Make something, I make something to counter it. Well, the anti-weapon is always cheaper than the weapon itself. So the roadside bomb is cheaper than this high-end truck. And so that progression happened along the way. The difference between us and our enemy is that we could afford to make the modifications. They couldn't. The enemy today is still using much of the same equipment they were using at the beginning of the war, while we have completely had a sea change in how we operate. So today soldiers are surviving hits that in the beginning of the war would have killed everybody in our vehicle. Now you bump in the road and you still go home. So that'll be one of the things you see in the book.
Well, as the necessity is the mother of invention, and you don't know how much you have to invent until you hit with things that you've never been hit before. You experience things that no other form of warfare has seen.
Yeah.
And I likened it too. I was like, men in the 1800s and early 1900s, it was more common for you to have a beard.
Yeah.
But in World War I, when our doughboys went over and fought in the trenches, they realized that, well, you can't have a beard because your gas mask doesn't fit properly and it doesn't seal against your face. Yeah. So when they came back from war, they were clean shaven. This is how warfare, added a little something culturally to the civilian population after it happened. It was just one more change that warfare, something took place there that enabled us to, address something.
Change the culture here. Oh, medically, there's huge changes. The civilian population at large, the medical services that you experience will be changed forever by our experience in the Middle East. We have all these new products now that didn't exist before. Technology always advances faster in times of war. I guess that's what motivates people to get off their butt and make something. Well,
like if you went to a police car 20 years ago and pulled a trauma kit out of the trunk of a police car, it might have been what we equate to just a standard first aid kit today. But military experiences and what our guys have had to deal with out in the field, making sure that they can bring their buddies home and save their lives, trauma kits, medical advancement, all of this stuff that happened on the battlefield is now reflective in our at-home society. Things that we've taken for granted now are things that were proven on the field of battle.
Exactly.
That you guys had to develop that stuff.
Some of those things you'll see the tracks of that in the book.
Yeah.
Now, the book itself, I'm covering 57 months of combat, but everything's not in there.
Oh, well, you'd have to write it.
When I went to get published, I'm talking to an editor. Now you can only make a book so large that will sell. If you put everything that's in the journal in a book, you have something as big as War and Peace, and you can't move that. Plus, the story wouldn't really sell. It's not big for a market. So what the editor had done was help pick events out so that you have a normal story arc. You know, there's a beginning and an end. Where Black Flag Journals differs from other books on this current war is that the normal book, the normal trope that sells is it'll revolve around one big battle, you know, and you'll see it in the title, Operation whatever, or, you know, no short day or something. A lot of good things out there, a lot of real well-written things. But the normal line is who they were as a young man or woman, shaping events in their life, the training they went through, and then this big battle into the book, 200 some odd pages, done. And if you're in the Army, you know, that big battle, that's what happens on Monday. You're going to have 2 or 3 more like that before the month is out. And we are on these 9 to 18 month deployments. So you have a lot of things happening. So in Black Flag Journals, we picked enough so you had this arc. There's some violent stories in there. I got my closest kill, longest gunfight, you know, lessons learned on city fighting. And then there's, you know, these humanitarian things we did. And then there's all these problems we solved so that you have an arc. It starts with the fall of the Twin Towers and what I was doing. It ends when I got back from my last tour, you know, the arc. So you'd have, you know, similar to some other books, there's a line, a beginning and an end.
And I know you go over a lot of the things you guys experience with the cultural differences between, you know, the people that you meet over there and what one thing is commonplace here is an insult there. What one thing is good and bad. I mean, there's so much to cover because people don't necessarily realize that these are things that once you take a civilian out of the bubble, and you put them into an entirely different culture and how to adapt. And then you have to figure, okay, you're in an entirely different culture with people who view the world differently, who have a completely different set of standards in their lives that they don't necessarily know. You know, like you call yourselves, you guys were the spacemen, because that's what you're coming in looking like. You know, you look like the Borg from Star Trek.
Exactly right. Culturally, there's
you know, you have people that have probably...
There's a lot of differences in cultures. In some places, I talk about the incompatibility of cultures. In this culture clash, I cover a couple different things in there because it's always happening. But we would have these advisors, and we would have to study the cultures that we were in, because you know, as a U.S. Army, we have these rules of engagement that we have to follow. This box, you know, those rules of engagement allow you to kill with a conscience. But it's the interpretation of those rules that have a great effect. And part of that interpretation comes from knowing what happens in an area, what is common in that culture. One example is there was a time in the Middle East where I could legally kill a man just because he was carrying a shovel. There were times I could legally kill a man on site just because he had a camera within the rules of engagement. But you had to understand the culture and the norms of that society to be able to make that determination. Using the shovel example, the enemy would most often put their roadside bombs in under the cover of darkness, and they're digging these traps for you and setting a bomb in the road or next to a road. And we have all this night vision. We own the night, so we're watching, we're looking. Well, not everybody you see walking around with a shovel at night is someone that you need to kill. Culturally, in some of these areas, the farmers go out late at night and they redig water channels to divert an irrigation ditch from one field to another because it's, you know, so hot in the middle of the day. So by knowing what the norms are in that culture, I can make that decision between shoot or don't shoot. And there's the cultural clash that we would experience sometimes. This is an experiment that all of your viewers could use. If you can encounter a soldier from this current era, ask them to tell you about Man Love Thursday. You get a bunch of wild responses. It's exactly what it sounds like. Most of us are conditioned by the media and the press to expect a very pious Islamic culture. They're all hyper-religious. But that's not the real case. That's not what we're seeing. It's kind of like a line from the Bible. You compare what one says with what one does. And when you see what they do, that's who they are. So just ask them about a Man Left Thursday and see what you get. Some of what it comes down to is, this difference between Sunni and Shia in Islam religion. The Ayatollah Khomeini back in the 70s made a statement where he said trisexuality is in accordance with Islam. Well, he was answering a different question when that was asked. But the way that's interpreted through a lot of the Middle East is, pedophilia, bestiality, homosexuality. Some of these things, you can do that. Whereas the religion itself is telling them you can't do that. And they have things to worry about that you and I don't. We, as a nation, as a culture, we're the new kids on the block. These guys in Iraq, there's 7,000 years of recorded history there and beyond. In Afghanistan, that place has been occupied for 5,000 years. So some of the cultural norms that were established in a time before there was a written language have carried on into the current age. They've never been wiped out. Some of the stuff's never been cut. So a lot of these things are below the line. They kind of like an open secret. It's happening, or it's an expectation of power. One that will twerk a lot of your soldiers in Afghanistan is, their culture of dancing boys. They have a proclivity for, young men. So one of the PTSD things to consider is what is the effects of the rules of engagement on an individual that, once you slip onto the top of this roof at night and you find, several hashed out, half-naked Afghan men in a pile, and under that pile is a greased up 9-year-old boy. How do you not stab every individual on that roof and then get into the house and do what you can't do anyway? Well, we have rules of engagement. There's things we will do and things we won't do. So you snick the kid out of there and you go, invade this house and go after who you were going to go after anyway. But, what's the after effect? Knowing that when you release that kid back to the family, he's probably going back into that same world. Things to think about. And if you crack that bubble with some of your veterans that you encounter out there, you'll get a flood of stories.
In some respects, I don't know how when somebody says it's a culture, because there's so much savagery that I've heard about and so much savagery that I've seen, and say, well, this is a cultural norm. Well, it's not how do you use the word culture?
Well, that is one of the things I address in the book as well. A man is a man anywhere you go on this planet. We all have the exact same problems. We all have the exact same needs. But how a community decides to meet those needs often defines that community. But that definition then becomes what separates them from all others. So culture is just a thin veneer on humanity. One of the examples I use in the book is, common. We all have to go to the bathroom. We all got to relieve ourselves. Well, in the Middle East, they will they'll use their left hand to clean up after a bowel movement. Left hand, a little water. Sometimes it's sand. Sometimes the major material is removed with a smooth rock, and then you get the rest of it with sand, water in your hand. And then there's no soap to wash up with after the fact. So they have a culture of the left hand is your dirty hand, the right hand is your clean hand. That's the hand you're eating with. Compare that to how we address the problem of having to defecate, how we clean up. Whole different thing. They view us as the dirty guy because we're shaking hands with the right hand, and we're also cleaning yourself up the paper. Their view of you is different from our view of them. But that view was developed because this thin veneer on humanity of culture, as we had a problem to solve, and the way we chose to solve it is different. But that difference separates us. It also defines us. So I cover some of that in the book as well.
Yeah, so a lot of it, you try to. We've heard the term nation building, over the years, as after 9/11, from the Bush administration to the Obama administration, and you want to be supportive. You want to make sure that you do everything you can so that every time the serviceman and servicewoman is going out into the field, you're there to support everything that they do, because that's your duty as an American. You want to make sure that your fighting men are trained. But I said I feel so bad in so many regards that there's only you can only kill so many people. You can only destroy so much of the threat. How do you make a positive enough impact on a culture or cultures of people that are so different than our own by light years that we don't ever seem that we're going to be an enemy? How do we make ourselves so that we're not ever going to be an enemy to these people, where they're not going to want to create another 9/11? They're not going to want to do it. Is it just too far of a bridge for the two societies to ever come to an agreement where you stay there, we stay here, and everybody's fine? Or
eventually, I always have to have the optimistic view that eventually we can have peace. But you look at a worldview, Cain's still Abel, and we've never stopped. If you ask the Middle Eastern man the root of all these issues, and they will tell you the root is because Adam had two sons. Moses had two sons, and those two sons are the different worlds we have today. One became the Middle Eastern culture. One became the Western culture.
It's just
maybe I went too long on that one. I do cover the incompatibility of cultures, and some of it, if you wanted to take it down to a religious level, in Islam, the Quran is their major driving function. And along with that is a book called the Haditha. The Haditha is the life and times of Muhammad. And it is like an office operating system. The Haditha tells them what color to use for jihad, black. What color to use for leadership. For them, that's white. That's why the Taliban flag is black and white. They have these functions, and it's all laid out. But Islam itself is at war with itself. And this big dust up between Sunnis and Shias. There's the local belief that the first four caliphs, or first four leaders in Islam, are the last perfect ones. Everyone after that has been corrupt. And that's when you have this split between the different types of religion, different versions of Islam, just like there are different versions of Christianity. But in that regard, Islam is a rearward-looking religion. And that's where you get some of this compatibility of culture, is they're always trying to get back to this middle age, early middle age time. Because of the first four caliphs, those were the last people that were actually alive in the time of Muhammad. Once that last guy took off, they called him the hidden imam. That's when they basically went to war with each other. And this war, this engine of dysfunction in Islam revolves around the opening page of the Quran. Opening page of the Quran, it talks about Muhammad's in a cave, and an angel comes to him and gives him this information, and then he's able to write the Quran. Well, in that first page, it says the word of God was first given to the Israelites in the Talmud. And they lost their way, breaking into all these different versions of Judaism. Then the word of God was given to the Christians in the Bible. And then they lost their way, breaking into all these different versions of Christianity. Their superiority claim is that they are the Ummah, the people of one. They have one thought, one understanding. But today, there's many different versions of Islam as there are of Christianity. So they will always kill each other because they have to be one. Their superiority claim is suspect as long as there are all these other interpretations. So I use in the book like the analogy of the Lord of the Rings, of one ring to rule them all. Well, in Islam, one sect of Islam has to win to dominate everyone else. And then this operating system that they're under says that once they establish this caliphate, the caliphate then has the duty to expand outward and control the world at large. Where you're going to have an incompatibility is that Islam is the only religion that has a government system with it. You know, the Bible doesn't say how to run a city. The Quran and the Haditha and in these thousands of years of Islamic jurisprudence, that is a government. Sharia law is a law system. So, you know, going back to this incompatibility of cultures, you're from a whole different mindset. When I explain this to young soldiers, when I was still in, I would sometimes use the difference between Germany and America in their views of freedom. Both of these places are free. But when you speak to a European, especially one from Germany, when they talk about their freedoms, they will tell you what is allowed. You know, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. Their view of freedom is what is defined for them by their government. Your view of freedom is completely different. Your aperture is wide out. You can do anything except what you're told not to do. That's a much larger world. So in this apples to orange comparisons between a European vision of freedom and an American version of freedom, extrapolate that across the Middle East. Their version of what governance should look like versus our version of what governance should look like. Some will tell you that this dust-up really goes back to the very first World War of the ancient times, which would be between Greece and the Middle East. You know, one of those battles was the Battle of Thermopylae, you know, going into the Peloponnesian Wars. But yeah, I'm shooting too long on that one. But that gets at some of the this incompatibility of cultures. I think we can all live together, but there has to be a modification on something before we get to that point.
No, whatever is going to have to happen, it's gonna happen sooner or later. I don't want to see your grandchildren or my grandchildren having to fight the same battles that you guys have been fighting, but it always seems like there's a vicious cycle of battle that's never ending. And you know,
this is America's longest war.
I thank God that there are men and women in our nation that are willing to put that uniform on, to take that oath, and to take the fight to the enemy to do what needs to be done. I just wish you guys didn't have to do it as often. You know?
Well, thank you for that. But coming to the the length of this war, and that's part of the title is America's longest war. This is just the longest war for us. I mentioned we're the new kids in the block. You know, Europe's had 30 years wars, 100 years war.
Yeah.
Wars that Britain had not too long ago. It was 20 years. It's in an insurgency war. The other guy has a vote. They get to help determine how long they want to resist. And as long as they're willing to pay the price in blood, you will always have that threat. But something to consider as a society, some of what I, as the retired soldier, see is we have success-itis. You know, because we have been so successful as an armed force, the public at large hasn't really had to concern themselves with it. You know, no one has not been able to get a stick of butter because I'm in the Middle East capping somebody. You still got what you want. And where you have some guys coming back and they have this odd view of the world at large is that, you know, after the towers fell, the army went to war. Most of America went to Walmart.
Yeah.
We haven't had to be so involved because we have been successful.
Well, we'll go back and look during World War II. Everybody had a victory garden. Everybody had aluminum and steel drives. You know, women painted the little line up the back of their leg because they were saving all the nylon for the war effort.
Yeah.
You know, there was
large gunpowder bags.
Yeah, everything that I mean, we were making clothing out of paper, out of flour, bags of flour that manufacturers printed pretty, patterns on it, so that when Americans bought food, somebody could stitch together a dress out of the bags that the food came in.
Yeah.
These were sacrifices that Americans made. For 4 years in America, there was not a single American vehicle made for the domestic market. Everything went for the war effort. Today, then it seemed that everybody had a vested interest in not only the outcome of the war, but participating in the war in some capacity. They did something to sacrifice, whether it was rationing or whatever. Today, like you said, you guys went to war, America went to Walmart. People don't really see the day-to-day happenings in the war because Americans, for the most part, have a very short attention span.
Oh, yeah.
If it's not in their front lawn or in their garage, a lot of them don't even know that it exists.
Yeah, and most lives are local.
And it's a shame because there is a segment of American population, mostly the elite and ruling and elected class, that take that ignorance, that voluntary ignorance that Americans have towards so many things, and use it against us. It uses it to divide us from, whether it's on the racial, religious, color, sexual, whatever demographic they can use to divide the people, they use it to divide the people. And it's to our detriment because a lot of our rights are going away because people are not engaged. They're not paying attention to what's going on, and whether it's because they're distracted by reality TV or what the Kardashians are doing from one week to the next, I don't know. But if more people were engaged in what's actually happening, I think we would have a much different country. And I think
that's where I have my analogy of success-itis.
Yeah.
I use some of that same line when speaking to soldiers, and that is, World War II generation, they were called the greatest generation because everyone sacrificed. They did all the things you spoke of. They did without, and they worked for, so that the soldier could have. And so they were all vested in having a victory. In this current war, only 0.45% of the population participated. So not even 0.5%, went. And in total, only 0.5% even went in the uniform. Because, not everybody that joins gets deployed overseas. I mean, you might join and go to Korea or spend your time in Germany and then you're out. So not everybody that comes in uniform is going to combat. So this small segment. So I often refer to these soldiers that I had as they were the best part of their generation. They showed up.
Right.
And something that'll bring a man tear to your eye is, right after 9/11, the enlistments fall up. They fill up. And over the years, as it got, the death rate got high, those enlistments started to drop off. And then we're at a point decades later where I'm having new soldiers come in who were children when the towers fell. And these guys have spent their entire life waiting to get in that uniform and get a gun in their hand so they can go, make somebody account for their sins. They're the best part of their generation.
And in years from now, we're going to have people that have their whole lives have been spent in the shadow of the Liberty Tower, where they don't remember a world where there were 2 buildings instead of 1, where there were 3,000 additional civilians instead of not, where there was not a memorial. They will not know what it was like. You and I are roughly the same age, and there are events that took place in your life and in my life that I remember starkly, vividly. I can remember exactly where I was, exactly what I was doing, who I was with. Our parents were the same way. They remember Kennedy assassination, moon landing. They remember all of these things.
Yeah.
The servicemen and women that are in now remember when the towers fell, or at least part of it.
They're educated on it.
5 years from now, the kids are not going to remember that. There's not going to be that landmark, hallmark moment in their life. They could say they remember something. So they say, well, why did that war take place? What did we fight for?
Yeah.
You have to figure out who's going to explain that to them. Is it going to be explained by the people who actually went and fought that war, or is it going to be explained by people who have a certain point of view on the war?
Exactly. That's one of the challenges I throw on soldiers that I served with, and I bring some of these challenges up in the book. Is that history belongs to those that claim it. The story of America's longest war should be told by those who fought it, because if you don't define that war, someone else will. It's the exact same problems that you face there in the First Liberty Organization. Is others are trying to define who the gun owners are, and then what they look like and what they do. Where in reality, you're a very diverse group. You cover all corners of the American society. However, because someone else is trying to define you, they're painting this picture of who you are and what you do. The same thing will happen with us at this longest war. And like you mentioned, those that have a different view will try to paint it in a different light from what it actually was. So I'm doing what I think I need to do. Eyewitness account as to what happened, just as you were doing what you think you need to do.
Well,
Get out there and define the Second Amendment.
Well, it's important. It's important that you go out and do this, because my father's generation was the Vietnam veteran generation.
Mm-hmm.
And when these guys came back, we've all heard the stories about being hit on, being called baby killers, when Hollywood celebrities were sitting on anti-aircraft guns, celebrating the death of American soldiers and telling them that they didn't deserve to live. And I don't want our servicemen and servicewomen to have to wait that 40 years for their welcome home.
Yeah.
Because I see Vietnam veterans today, where 15 years ago, very rarely would you see a Vietnam vet walking around with a hat that said Vietnam veteran on. It was almost as like they were trying to forget that they were there, or they were trying to still deal with the cultural shame that was put on them for fighting the war that they were gifted into fighting.
You're exactly right. That was a time where the society at large blamed the soldier for doing what society at large made him do. Many of these veterans, they were drafted, they were impelled by the government, by we the people, to go into service and go fight in a war that your elected officials put you in, and then they blamed them for doing it.
Yeah, and then
I can see why they would just they're still mad.
Yeah, and then in the early '90s, we were celebrating, and to the point where there are statues in Canada of the men that ran across the border to avoid the responsibility that 57,000 other men and women paid their lives to fulfill.
I didn't know that one.
And I see our Vietnam vets today wearing their colors with the same pride as our Korean War veterans do, and what's remaining of our World War II veterans.
Yes.
I do not want to see a day come by, like I said, where our returning men and women have to wait their 40 years for their proper respect. They're earning it every single day on our battlefield. They're earning it every day from the minute they put their hand on that Bible and swear that oath. They're earning that respect, and they deserve that respect. And I want to make sure that the country that you guys go out and fight to preserve and protect is going to be better when you come home to it. And your rights are going to be preserved, that you're going to be respected, that you're going to have something that you found worthy of fighting for.
Yeah.
Because there is no draft anymore. You guys are doing this. You're volunteering to put your lives on the line. you deserve to have a country to come home to that's worthy of the sacrifice that you make.
I agree with that, and thank you for that sentiment. Just to give you some data to back this up, you had to go back to the Revolutionary War to find the time when we fought this long with an entirely volunteer force. That was the last time we fought with this long with a volunteer force. Revolutionary War, longest war in U.S. history. Same. Something else that I bring up in the book, and you're talking about the the culture, and then soldiers in service, and then I mentioned how small that group of service members is. One group that doesn't get a lot of attention are the spouses, of the soldiers. In a comparison contrast, apples to oranges. In the Vietnam War, 14% of the Army was married. So you have a really small segment of families that are involved in, directly involved in a service member going to combat. Today, in this volunteer Army, half of the Army is married. So you have a lot of families that are dealing with these soldiers that are constantly going, coming back. So I cover some in the book of, as a family unit, how we dealt with these events. Because your kids are hearing the stories of what you're doing second and third hand. And, like any big fish story, they get bigger over time. So by the time they hear it, it's way out of proportion. So one of the things I tried to get to in the book was I'm laying out for my daughter my account of what actually happened as opposed to what she'd already heard. So and then in that accounting, I put forth the idea with the spouses of soldiers that there may be a possibility of spousal PTSD. When you're deployed, make a policeman and a soldier comparison. Like in your own life, when your father was a law officer, when he left the house, your mother worried from the time she saw him leave until he came back. There's that angst. Well, as he's running around doing his duty, he knows that there's times when he has no danger. And then there's times when he's in high danger. So we're able to live in that world. Same thing with the soldier. When I would deploy, my wife would worry from the time I leave to the time she saw me again a year later. In this combat zone, I kind of know when I'm in danger and when I'm not, mostly. So I'm not always torqued up. They are. Plus, as you rise in rank, you're attached to larger and larger organizations. So by extension, my wife was attached to larger and larger organizations. So in this combat zone, you might lose a couple of guys with this unit, a couple of guys with that unit. Spread out over a battlefield for a brigade, maybe it's 48 deaths. But in your one unit, maybe it's 4 or 5. So I'm only dealing personally with 4 or 5 at a time, whereas she is dealing with 48 different deaths, and then she has to deal with the families of these soldiers. So one of the things that would happen in Germany, where we deploy from sometimes, is that the families would want to travel back to see the last place that their son was alive before he deployed. So you're showing them through the barracks, you're showing them the places where they would eat, sleep. Our wives are doing that. They're putting up with that. They're not paid for it.
No.
So there's the possibility of spousal PTSD, and then the effects on your children. We in your own life, you set the standards of what is acceptable and not acceptable for your kids. So the Army is kind of the fire department, and that we tend to breed our own replacements. A lot of the people, 68% of the Army is associated with the military before they ever show up. Just like Finney, a lot of the people that are fire departments in Finney, they are firefighter families, the sons and daughters of. So as you set these standards for your family, if all they've heard of is how you win all these fights, but you win them because of this violence, what's the effect on them? What did you say is okay?
That's why I'm also quite certain that when it comes to this, there's probably more than a couple of chapters of stories that were not told in here for just that purpose. Because there are certain
there's a lot of things that aren't told. Yeah.
That you just don't want to, not because you can't, but because sometimes somebody's better off not knowing and not having that. You have images in your head that I pray to God I would never have to see. And reading through this and the picture that you put together for the reader is graphic. You really get a sense of what it was like to be there. If you close your mind and open your mind's eye and you can visualize being there. Like I said, there's a lot of things that you guys went and had to deal with. I wouldn't want to wish that on anybody, friend or enemy, and just to have that image in your head.
You're wired for war, you're wired for life.
Yeah.
But in my case, and where I can kind of help others, and what I tried to do with my book is that I was raised in a military family. I mean, we always had somebody in something, in some conflict. So, and the same thing when I went to school, a lot of my instructors were retired military guys. So I'm hearing these stories of human wave attacks. I got these veterans of World War II, Korea, Vietnam, spread throughout the family. I was kind of raised for it. And some of these things that people would view as a horrific event, for me, it's not that bad because I was already raised to do that.
Right.
I kind of had a really good time doing really bad things. But really, hey, thank you for paying for it, man. I probably owe the government some money for that ride. But there are others that there wasn't such a thing for them. It was a bad, I say that those people are probably more sane. They're a little more moral than I.
It's not that they're normal, they cope differently.
They cope differently. Well, I use the analogy in the book of Coke bottles and aspirin bottles when you're talking about one's ability to cope with war. Some men are Coke bottles. You can keep putting them into these situations again and again and again, and they're still there. Others are like an aspirin bottle. The first time something happens, man, I'm done. I got to get out. In a voluntary army, that happens. But what is true of the aspirin bottle is also true of the Coke bottle. When you fill up, you fill up. But time seems to empty that out. I do catalog somewhat where the Army got better over time on how to deal with these things. I probably have more support today in this current war than I had in any war that I was in earlier. Grenada was my first one, under Reagan, 83. So, I mentioned that I've been in war and killed every president from Reagan to Obama. I got out in June of 16. But this current conflict, I have much more support than I ever had before. And it helps sustain you. I'm glad for one that the majority of society, the American populace, has a much more favorable point of view towards our servicemen and women than they did in the previous generation. Yeah.
That those who were around in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, did not necessarily have as kind and welcoming a heart when it came to our men and women as they do now. They say that one of the things that changed America, and this is going to sound funny, but one of the things that changed American culture a little bit was the movie Top Gun.
Really?
They say that when Top Gun came out, it was close enough to the end of the Vietnam War, where people had it was the first film since the Vietnam War that painted our military in a very positive way, that showed sacrifice, that showed devotion, dedication, all that. And it may or may not be true. I don't know. But I ask a lot of guys, why did you join the military? And they tell me Top Gun.
Yeah. Okay.
wanted to be a pilot. I had no idea I'd be an infantryman, but I wanted to be a pilot.
Yeah, because who doesn't want to fly with guns?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's everything rolled into one.
But I'm glad that society has taken a little, bit of a better turn.
Yeah.
And I hope that books like the Black Flag Journals continue to inspire more civilians to understand what our servicemen and women go through, what you guys have been through, and help better relate to you. Because that's an important, like you said, that's an important thing with camaraderie. Our servicemen and women are spread. When they come home, they're going to be spread out everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Having them being able to talk to a neighbor or a friend or a relative and be able to confide in them with some of the things that you've dealt with and not have to worry about traveling 3 hours to sit down and have a beer with somebody they serve with.
Yeah.
It's going to go a long way to preserving your sanity, but also preserving the lives of a lot of folks that feel that they're in it alone. And we don't want them to feel alone.
No, we don't. And where this kind of helps other soldiers medically is that not everyone can tell a story. There's guys that tell a really good story, and there's guys that can't. Some have taken the book and they'll find an event that relates to what they experienced, and they'll use that when they go talk to the VA or when they go talk to the medical provider, and then that gives the provider a sense of what that individual went through, and then the two gain common knowledge.
Yeah. Well, this could also be used as a tool, like I say, if a serviceman or a servicewoman wants to say, hey, listen, if you want to understand a little bit about what I went through, what I dealt with, if I can't tell you myself, pick up a copy of this book and read it. It'll give you a little bit of a better foundation. So they can use it. This can be used as a tool for outreach for a service member who might want to better explain to their wife or their husband or their kids or their brothers and sisters or even a parent, this is what I went through. This is what I had to deal with. Not me specifically. This is not my footprints, but this is someone who walked my path.
Yeah.
Someone who ate the same dirt that I ate, bled the same blood. This is what we went through. And this is, as I said, a very good tool for being able to bridge that gap between people, to help as a universal translator, so to speak.
Yeah. Now, on a different note, it's also there's some entertaining things in there. As a shooting community, you might enjoy listening, about what it's like to engage targets from elevation. Like I talk about a good fight called the Fence of Doom. I won't spoil the story, but it involves, you have to work out different shooting angles between differences in elevation between gun and target. So I talk about that. So, if you're a shooter and you read through this event, which is actually a pretty good killing event, you can also see how we are working out, how we get them, how they're trying to get us. It's a pretty good deal because ballistics, fire control, good marksmanship, they're all part of survival, and they're also part of performing your duty.
Yeah.
But you'll be as if you're a shooter and you're reading through this, you'll see a lot of things that speak to you, and you might even have your own opinions there where you could riff off of what I've already done, and maybe you come up with the next best thing or the right answer for a future environment.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about the Vietnam vets as well. This is a chance for me to thank them. I am the beneficiary of their experience. I go to war, I have body armor that will actually stop an armor-piercing bullet. They never had anything like that. I've got the amount of medical care on me that before the towers fell, only an EMT had. Now I've got EMTs walking around with me. And all that experience came from lessons learned from the Vietnam War. And now it's my turn to put lessons.
Well, it's the cumulative lessons of.
So the people that follow me can push it even further.
It's the cumulative lessons of warfare that make a soldier today the soldier he is. I mean, you'd be pretty sure that the next colonel that went into battle against the Native Americans after Custer probably decided not to leave the Gatling guns behind. You know,
Yeah.
it was a lesson hard learned.
Yes.
But listen, Dennis, I'm gonna let you sign off. We don't want to get too far into the woods with this. We want to give people a reason to buy the book and read
Oh,
the
yeah.
book.
Yeah, it's 57 months of combat. So we
Yeah,
can, it would take 57 months to talk through it. And, and not everything's in there. It's just what they said I can do.
It's packed, and I'm sure at one point or another when things may become declassified, or where you're able to talk about things in the future, there might be a volume 2. Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
sure
we all have non-disclosure agreements.
Yeah, I'm sure you've probably got enough to fill up 5 volumes of this if pressed. But for now, I encourage everybody to get a copy of the Black Flag Journals. The lettering's backwards because of the computer, but we're going to have the links below. Where else can we get a copy of this right now?
You can go online, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. A lot of places have it. You just Google Black Flag Journals and you'll see it'll pop up. Walmart has it as well.
All right. Well, we're going to make sure to put a link to everywhere that you can get a copy of this on our website, and we're going to also see about what we can do to maybe get 1 or 2 signed copies from the author, since I know him, and see about.
Okay. Yeah, I'll send you a few, and then maybe you can use those to raise money for your organization.
Well, if we're going to raise money for anybody, we're going to raise money for the men and the women who appear in this book with you, because you guys, without you and the fellows, everyone wearing a uniform, the air that's in our lungs, we would be having to pay for it ourselves. You guys provide that for us.
But I'm just a GI. I was raised to be a GI. The true hero are these young soldiers that came in a time of war. That's the ones to support.
Awesome. Like I said, Dennis, from my family to you, thank you again for all the service.
Yeah.
We're glad that you made it home, and we're able to put this together not only to share your experiences, but the experiences of those that you marched into combat with.
Yes.
I'm sure they appreciate it as with. So, again, thank you very much, everybody. Find the links down below. The links will be above. When you read the article that goes with this, you're going to share some of the photos that are in here. Not all of them. Some of them you're going to have to pay for. So make sure you go out and get yourselves a copy of this. I'm enjoying mine. Dennis, once again, thank you very much for spending this hour with us, and we really appreciate everything, sir.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Have a great one.
You too. Thank you.
Politicians take from you and me the very liberties that set us free. Stand up and fight for this democracy. Is you and me, whether it found us saddle up, let's ride. Now when the real Americans, please stand up. No more hiding your face in the sand. Well, the real American